You're standing on a hill above Kagoshima, and the government you helped build is about to kill you. It's September 24th, 1877. Below you, more than 5,000 Imperial soldiers have surrounded the slope with trenches and gun batteries. Behind you are fewer than 400 men, and most of them fought the same war you did. The war that put the current government in power in the first place. 9 years earlier, samurai swords had toppled a 200-year-old regime and handed Japan to a new emperor. Now that emperor's army, built, funded, and armed by the men who once called themselves samurai, is finishing the job of erasing the samurai as a class. Why would a government destroy the very warriors who created it? Most people assume Japan simply modernized and the samurai faded out gently, the way old customs do. That's not what happened. The samurai class was taken apart on purpose, in specific legal steps, over about 8 years, and some of the men who built the new Japan decided that process had gone too far. For roughly 250 years before any of this, the samurai were not just soldiers. They were the entire ruling structure of Japan. Under the Tokugawa shogunate, the country was carved into more than 200 domains, each ruled by a lord, each lord served by his own samurai retainers. A samurai owed his sword, his loyalty, and often his life to one lord and no one else. In exchange, he received a hereditary stipend, a rice allowance passed down through his family, whether or not Japan was at war. For most of those 250 years, Japan wasn't. That peace created a strange problem. An entire class of professional warriors existed, with almost nothing left to fight. Loyalty had to be maintained anyway, because a lord's power depended on knowing his men would still die for him, if it ever came to that. So domains kept the machinery of loyalty running. Through rank, ceremony, stipend, and strict codes of conduct, Bushido not as ancient mysticism, but as a working discipline, for men whose main job, most years, was administration. Trust between a samurai and his lord wasn't a feeling. It was built and reproven constantly. Through service in the lord's household, through public displays of discipline, through the stipend that tied a family's survival to the lord's continued favor. A samurai who lost his lord's trust lost his income. One who lost his lord entirely through the lord's death, disgrace, or dismissal became a ronin, a masterless samurai, cut loose from the one relationship that had defined him. Picture the actual mechanics of it. A young samurai's name went into a domain's retainer register, the same way a soldier's name goes onto a unit roster today, tied to a rank, a stipend amount, and a specific lord's household. Advancement wasn't a matter of personal ambition. It came through documented service, standing guard through a lord's illness, managing his accounts honestly when no one was checking, showing composure during a ceremonial duty that could easily go wrong in public. Every one of those moments was a small, visible test, and the register recorded the result. 250 years of peace didn't make that testing pointless. It just moved the proving ground from the battlefield to the household. By the 1850s and 1860s, that whole system was under strain from outside. American and European ships were forcing Japan open to trade on unequal terms, and a growing number of samurai, especially in outer domains like Satsuma and Choshu, decided the shogunate was too weak to protect the country. In January 1868, armies from those domains defeated shogunate forces at the Battle of Toba-Fushimi near Kyoto and declared the emperor restored to direct rule. It's called the Meiji Restoration, and it was fought and won largely by samurai in the name of samurai honor and national survival. The war didn't end there, and it exposed something the Brotherhood story usually skips past. The old shogun surrendered his capital without a fight, but not every domain accepted the new order. Aizu in the north stayed loyal to the fallen regime, and by autumn its forces were under siege in their own castle town. Aizu had formed a reserve unit of teenage samurai, barely into their teens, called the Byakuotai, the White Tiger Unit. During the fighting, a group of them saw smoke rising over the castle from a nearby hilltop, assumed their home had fallen, and chose ritual suicide over surrender. The castle hadn't actually fallen yet. Aizu held out roughly a month longer before its defenders finally gave in. Samurai loyalty didn't break cleanly along one line in 1868. It broke into two competing loyalties, to the emperor or to the old order, and samurai killed samurai over which one deserved the sword. Here's the part most people skip. The men who won that war now had to govern a country, and governing meant looking honestly at what kind of military a modern nation actually needed. A patchwork of 200 domains, each with its own armed retainers loyal to its own lord, was exactly the kind of divided power that had let foreign gunboats push Japan around in the first place. The new government's own military planners, men who had themselves been samurai, concluded that Japan needed one national army answering to one treasury treasury, recruited from the whole population. The dismantling started fast. In 1871, the domains themselves were abolished and replaced with prefectures under direct central control. 2 years later, in 1873, the government introduced universal conscription. Any man between 20 and 40 could be called up, regardless of birth. For the first time in centuries, a farmer's son could serve in Japan's army, and a samurai's birthright to be the only man legally permitted to fight for his country simply ended. Notice what that changes. Loyalty had always run from samurai to lord, in exchange for a stipend and status no one else could claim. Conscription didn't ask samurai to share that status. It erased the thing that made it exclusive. The stipends themselves lasted a few years longer, and they were the real financial backbone of samurai life. Money owed to a family, whether that family did anything productive with it or not. In 1876, the government moved on those too. It converted every hereditary stipend into a one-time government bond, then let the value of those bonds drop through inflation and rushed conversion terms. A family income that had been guaranteed for generations became a slip of paper that steadily lost value. That same year, the government issued the hereditary, the sword ban, prohibiting anyone outside the military and police from carrying a sword in public. The one object that visibly marked a man as samurai on sight in the street was now illegal for him to wear. Put the pieces together and the pattern is direct. Conscription took the samurai's military monopoly. The bond conversion took their guaranteed income. The sword ban took their public identity. None of it happened by accident, and none of it happened all at once. It happened in a sequence, each step closing off one more thing that had made a samurai instead of just another citizen. Some samurai adapted. They sold their bonds, went into business, farming, police work, or government service, and the transition, while painful, didn't end in violence. This wasn't a small group quietly fading away. Nearly 2 million people were reclassified as shizoku, former samurai in their households, roughly 1 in every 17 people in Japan at the time, all absorbing the same loss of status within a few years of each other. Satsuma wasn't even the first domain to answer that loss with force. In 1870, disgruntled former samurai Rosen saga. In 1876, the same year as the sword ban, a small band in Kumamoto calling themselves the Shinpuren attacked a garrison with swords alone, believing modern weapons dishonored their cause, and were crushed within hours. Days later, samurai in Hagi rose under a former restoration hero named Maibara Issei and lost just as fast. Each rebellion was smaller and shorter than the last, put down by the same conscript army the samurai were protesting. By the time Satsuma moved, the government had already answered this exact grievance 3 times over, and every answer had been the same one: overwhelming force, applied quickly. Saigo Takamori was a Satsuma samurai and one of the restoration's central military leaders, a man without whom the emperor might never have been restored to power at all. He wasn't a man clinging to the past out of ignorance. He'd helped plan the modern army the new government was building. His break with the government wasn't about technology or nostalgia. It was about what he believed the restoration had promised versus what it was delivering. He watched former allies enrich themselves in the new bureaucracy, while ordinary samurai lost their income and their legal status in the space of a few years, and he came to see the government as corrupt, not merely modernizing. By 1877, the resentment in Satsuma had a structure behind it. Private military academies Saigo had founded, filled with young samurai who saw him as the last honest man in the government he'd helped build. In January of that year, the government sent a steamship to quietly remove weapons and ammunition stored in a Kagoshima arsenal, worried about exactly this kind of unrest. Academy students caught wind of it, broke into the powder magazine over 2 nights, and looted a naval shipyard. For good measure. Saigo was away in the mountains when it happened. When his younger brother rushed to tell him, Saigo's first reaction, by most accounts, wasn't triumph. It was closer to disbelief, a question about what the students thought they'd just started. What they'd started was a war. Within days, Satsuma stripped Saigo of his court rank and government titles, which meant there was no path back to the negotiating table. On February 22nd, roughly 15,000 Satsuma troops marched on Kumamoto Castle, a government stronghold on Kyushu, expecting a quick capture. They got a siege instead. The castle had been built more than 2.5 centuries earlier by Kato Kiyomasa. famous for fortress design, and this was the first time its defenses had ever actually been tested in battle. Kumamoto's garrison numbered only a few thousand men, but a mysterious fire had already burned through part of the castle's supplies before the fighting even started, and still the walls held. Saigo's samurai, trained for speed and close combat, had no answer for a fortress designed 2.5 centuries earlier. To withstand exactly this kind of assault, this is the pressure test. Loyalty that costs nothing proves nothing. The samurai who joined Saigo weren't choosing an easy side. They were choosing to fight the government their own class had installed against a national army that now included conscripted farmers with rifles. They knew the odds, and for the first weeks, they nearly beat them anyway. While the siege dragged on outside Kumamoto's walls, a government relief force pushed south to break it, and the two armies collided at a mountain pass called Tabaruzaka in early March. It became one of the costliest battles of the entire rebellion. Imperial troops alone reportedly fired several 100,000 rounds a day for over a week, and both sides lost thousands of men killed or wounded, fighting over a single road. The Imperial force, outnumbering Saigo's roughly 6-1, eventually broke through. Kumamoto Castle held out until mid-April, when reinforcements finally reached the starving garrison, and the siege that was supposed to open Saigo's path to Tokyo instead cost him the initiative he could never fully recover. From there, the retreat became the story. Saigo's army, worn down to a fraction of its original strength, was pushed back across Kyushu for months, outmaneuvered at river crossings, outgunned in open country, losing men to desertion. As the cause looked less and less winnable, by September, what remained of the rebellion, a group some accounts place at only a few hundred men, others closer to 400, slipped past imperial patrols and made it home to Satsuma territory. They climbed the hill of Shiroyama above Kagoshima, the same city where many of them had grown up, and dug in one last time. Waiting for them were more than 5,000 imperial troops, backed by warships anchored offshore. The final assault came on the morning of September 24th. Saigo was hit by gunfire during the fighting and mortally wounded. Accounts describe a retainer assisting him in ending his life by his own hand, in keeping with the samurai custom of ritual suicide rather than capture. Within hours, the fighting on Shiroyama was over, and with it the last organized samurai resistance to the New Japan. The government Saigo had helped build was the government that ended him. That's not an accident of history. It's the direct outcome of what happens when the people who create a new order can't agree among themselves on how far that order should go. Within a year, one of Saigo's oldest allies and rivals in government, Okubo Toshimichi, was himself assassinated by former samurai who saw him as the architect of everything Saigo had died opposing. The men who built the New Japan kept paying for it, on both sides of the argument, long after Shiroyama went quiet. So why did Japan get rid of the samurai? Not because their courage stopped mattering, and not because the country simply outgrew them by accident. The Meiji government concluded deliberately that a modern nation could not run two systems of loyalty at once, one to the emperor and the state, and one to hereditary lords and clans through their sworn retainers. Conscription, the bond conversion, and the sword ban weren't separate policies. They were one policy, executed in stages, aimed at making sure that when Japan went to war again, every soldier answered to the same flag. Most samurai accepted that. Trade, a determined few, led by one of the men who'd made the New Japan possible, decided the price of that unity was too high, and paid for that decision on a hillside above Kagoshima. The government that survived Shiroyama never went back to the old arrangement. In the years that followed, it built its new conscript army around a single chain of command running straight to the emperor, with none of the old middle layer of personal loyalty to a lord left standing in between. The men who had once proven themselves through service to a domain's retainer register now proved themselves through rank earned in a national institution open to anyone. The register didn't disappear. It just stopped asking which family a soldier came from. Go back to that morning on Shiroyama. The men on that hill weren't outsiders being crushed by a distant power. They were founders standing against the machine they'd helped design because the machine no longer had room for what they'd been. Japan didn't get rid of the samurai by forgetting them. It got rid of them by building something that could no longer afford to let them stay the same.